Hi, Professor Kelly. During the screencast, I just want to go over my final project and make my presentation. Apologize in advance if my voice gets scratchy. I have a little bit of a cold and a cough. So, our project is on the years a student spends at Mesa College and the variables that may affect it. The purpose of our project was to find out how many years it takes a student to transfer. There are a lot of outside variables that really affect this. And the people in our group, we all saw this based on our different situations. We wanted to find out how finances primarily affect how long it'll take you to transfer, because it's supposedly only supposed to take 2 years, but that's just not very realistic. We looked at how working affects this time, outside funding, and major also affect this. Going over some background, when we were doing some research, we found that most students do not complete college within 4 years, just based on funding. A lot of this has to do with major. Students usually change their major throughout their 4 years, and this also adds an extension to how long they'll be there because they have to receive different credits based on different majors. We also saw that cost of tuition and living expense affects this. In cities with colleges and, different opportunities, there's usually an extended cost of living. So students who don't live with their parents, we usually expect them to have to pay for their own rent, and this means they're going to have to work a job while they go to college. It's also due to insufficient planning and just financial expenses that come with it. If you don't come into college with outside credits, you usually expect to take longer. If you don't create a plan with your counselor, you usually take the wrong classes and don't get the credits you need. This is something that I saw in my own experience from transferring into Mesa, was that I couldn't get in to see a counselor, so that just added a year to my transfer time. So we expected this to affect other students as well. Our data collection, we made a survey through forms through Google. We did this because we felt like it would be more concise and easier than surveying by hand. We asked our different classes. You also asked your Thursday class for us to take the survey. I'm in primarily online classes. This is my only in-person class, so I sent it out through the message center in Blackboard, and some of the other students with social media went ahead and sent it out through those. A potential issue with our data is the students that did get left out on campus. I at least don't have any other in-person classes, so I usually go to work right after school, so I couldn't stay and sample in person. We saw this with a lot of other people in our group. We also felt like there was an issue with the students who are no longer coming to class due to attendance or due to dropping classes. And our other biggest issue was that if you're not at a transfer level, you're guesstimating how long it'll take you to leave, and it's always longer than we think. And also that we are in mainly GEs right now, so people who are taking their final semesters for their major-based classes, they're going to have a more realistic expectation, but we didn't have the ability to reach those students a lot of the time. So for our survey, we looked at how many years it takes you to reach transfer level. If you're not at transfer level, what does your academic plan say? What is your major? Do you have prior credits? How many hours a week do you work? Do you live at home? And do you have outside funding? Our research questions were mainly, how does outside funding affect how long it'll take you to leave Mesa College? And do having certain credits influence your major? These are the links to our data if you want to go on and look at them. For data cleansing, our biggest one had to do with majors. When we originally created the survey, we left out some important ones, and we didn't clump STEM. So we went through, we changed social studies, to humanities. We also added business, which was a very important one, and we grouped together any people who put science or math. We made it STEM. And then there were a lot of people who left it blank. There were about 3 to 5 students who left it blank. So we created the other category if they hadn't already chosen other for those. We also had someone who put in that they worked 80 hours a week. I didn't feel like that was realistic. Even when I've had to work 2 or 3 jobs, I haven't been able to reach 80 hours while going to school. So we went ahead and deleted them because it created a huge outlier in our data. We also had people who would give a range of hours they worked a week. So we used the average of their numbers, and then some people wrote like 30 plus, 20 plus. So we had to take out the plus sign at the end of their data. Our categorical variables. Our biggest one was what major are you in? This is a huge one that we thought would affect how long it takes students to transfer. Our other variables were, do you live with your parents? Do you have prior credits? And do you receive outside financing? Our last variables were, how long does it take you to reach transfer level? And if not, what is your academic plan predict you will leave at? And our quantitative variable, for this we used a histogram and a stats summary for how many hours a week do you work. And then jumping down to my slides, I looked at hours worked and financial support. For mine, I ran both the chi-square test and an ANOVA because I didn't necessarily meet the requirements for one of the tests specifically. So I ran both just for some extra support to my results. I looked at these two variables because I felt like they were the most reliable for the questions asking how long it'll take you to reach transfer level. Because we had two different options and one of them was a guess, I just didn't feel like it was reliable. So I used these, and in my results I'll also look at what Angie received because she looked at hours worked affecting where the people are at transfer level. For this, my ANOVA test, I didn't meet all the assumptions, which is why I also used the chi-squared. For independence, the results are independent of each other, but there's a far right skew in my normality, which doesn't give you equality of variance. So with this, I'll have to proceed with caution. My null was that the mean hours worked are equal for students who do and do not receive financial support. The alternative was that they are not equal. I put in a box plot so you can just see the difference in my means, and they're a pretty extreme difference. So when looking at the two graphs that were previously in there, we could see the extreme difference in the data points. It doesn't look like there is equality based on that, and my p-value was 0.0017, so I couldn't use the 99% confidence level, but using the 95%, we still reject the null. It's smaller than 0.05. 0.05. But because the assumptions weren't met, I still left in my chi-squared. With our summary, though, there is enough evidence to conclude that the mean hours the student worked does affect whether or not they receive financial support. And I went in and I threw my ANOVA data in there as well at the bottom. For my chi-squared, I made my categorical variables, I made my quantitative into a categorical. This allowed me to run the chi-squared. It wasn't necessarily the best option to use, but it did give me some extra support. My null was that financial support does not affect how many hours of work you have to, or how many hours you have to work in a week. My alternative was that it does affect how much you have to work in a week. For this, my p-value was 0.003, which is less than 0.05 and 0.01. So I can reject the null in this as well. There is enough evidence to conclude that financial support greatly impacts how much MESA students we interviewed had to work. My issue with this one that I had was that there was less than 5 pieces of data per cell, and this was just due to how many responses we received in the survey. We received exactly 50. This would have been a lot more reliable if we got a lot more students to respond, obviously, and I'll talk about that more in my conclusion. So looking at the conclusion, based on the data that I got that financial support affects how many hours you have to work, and Angie seeing in her data that being a working student at any level does affect how long you'll spend at Mesa College, we can conclude that there is some sort of a connection between a lack of financial assistance and how long it'll take you to leave MESA due to the time you spent working. Obviously, correlation does not mean causation, but we're looking at the connection between these data points, and it does seem that there is some support in there. And this supports the hypothesis that we created at the beginning of our project. In future work, the biggest thing that I would change when redoing the project is getting at least 80 data points. It was really hard to run any of our tests because we received so few responses, and also I would rewrite the survey. And we wanted to ask more specific questions about transfer level. I would try to not use anyone who's not at transfer level in the next, if we were to run this again. It just created data that we couldn't realistically use in our results. And I would have liked to have more variation in our responses, like reaching people in their major base classes. This would just give us more reliable data, and I really feel like that was the biggest issue in our project. All right, and that's the end of my presentation.